Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lemper, your regular host. On today's episode, we're going to talk about fires, NASAMS, HIMARS. We're going to talk about a number of different assets, but also the Army's newest brigade, the 10th Brigade. I've got the commander of the 10th Brigade with me as my co-host for today, Brigadier Nick Wilson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely awesome. I think there's a lot of media, TS, and we're going to get to Talisman Sabre and your contribution on that because it was absolutely awesome to be part of and watch. I just did an episode with one of the current operations officer in the ex-con for TS, and it was just electric what got achieved, both in the Prism and GMLARS and then the high range stuff. But before we get to that, I think everyone's asking, a lot of people have asked for episodes on the current construct of certain brigades, one of which, and the most loud comments I've had, is what does 10 Brigade look like? Can you just go through the state of play? We've seen the introduction of HIMARS and NASAMS super quick, and we're going to talk about the capability rolling out. But more broadly, your brigade now, how does it look on the ground and what's the current situation for 10 Brigade?
Yeah, look, I think for me, having 30 years in the Army, it's probably the quickest I've ever seen a capability generated. 2.5, 3 years ago, the brigade was a CIT, capably led but small. It went from 4 people to 12. Last year, I think we're about 30 in the headquarters. Now the brigade's just shy of 1,000. We went from no direct command units overnight to having 4. And then comes the onset of the capability itself being the introduction into service of various platforms and munitions. At the minute, our headquarters is predominantly quartered in RAF Base Edinburgh, and it will remain there for a number of reasons, which I can talk to. At the same time, 16 Regiment will clearly move from Adelaide Hills down to RAF Edinburgh into bespoke, purpose-built, game-changing facilities for them. At the minute, we have not only our headquarters in Adelaide, but a node in Brisbane, which generates the nucleus of the divisional JFEC, or Joint Fires Effects Coordination Centre, under a colonel. We have 9th Regiment, which is our predominantly CERCAT 5, but in fact inclusive of all CERCAT regiment. It is a localised ISR regiment employing a number of types of small UAS in support of both the JTF 629 on the 2nd Division mission set, but also equally in support of the brigade itself. And we saw that on Talisman Sabre, where they deployed both with the 2nd Division mission and also the Australian 1st Division. So very important, strong regiment of more than 480 soldiers and officers spread right across Australia.
I think you said the only place they're not is in the NT. Is that right? So they cover the rest of Australia, basically.
Yeah. They do have some soldiers who are living in the NT. They just don't have a depot in the Northern Territory. They have partner relationships right across every other state and territory, and one of their strengths is clearly connecting the 10th Brigade to communities right across Australia. Yeah. And we've seen their emerging concept of employment go from what was historically based as a part-time artillery unit.
Yeah, fired mortars was like, and then subsequently take up the ISR role and then, Yeah,
and they're kicking it out of the park. They've really taken on the adoption or transfer of their primary employment category to an ISR employment category. We just opened their second ROBC for the year last week. So they really are quite literally running at the target, and it's great to see.
That's 9 Reg, the other units that are underneath you, sir.
Yep, so we've got 14 Reg, specifically 54 Siege battery. That was raised with effect January this year. It has the benefit of being full of exceptionally motivated soldiers, officers and NCOs who all come from other trades in Army. So until the trade's ratified, we are recruiting predominantly from an in-service workforce, which has huge advantages for the growth path of that regiment, employing trained asset.
And are you getting people transferring into artillery from other corps? And also, how you've got the mammoth task of having the skeleton crew in the headquarters for the initial component, and then build a brigade basically, and then you're sort of trying to get as many soldiers that are super keen and want to get their hands on all this new kit. How is that built? Those soldiers, how do they come to the brigade?
Yeah, so there's an interim step, if you like. The call for volunteers to man the 1st Long Range Strike Regiment went out, and in conjunction with the Career Management Agency, we took approximately 50 from across Army. Many of those were RAA soldiers, predominantly ECN 162s, with a smattering of AXOs for our Fire Direction Centre.
Yep.
But there were other corps. We've got some cavalrymen. We've got some infanteers, previously of the 7th Battalion, who are also serving with us and have undertaken the necessary trade training to be employed on the HIMARS detachment now. No pressure for them to come across the RAA. They receive exactly the same training. I think it's fair to say that the motivation within that subunit, probably one of the highest in Army at the moment.
I could only imagine, yeah.
I think anecdotally across the headquarters and 14 Regiment, I think we've only had one voluntary discharge in about 9 months, which is indicative of their work pattern at the minute.
Yeah.
Hugely exciting.
Achieving amazing things on tests, which we'll get to, is actually firing missiles and the like. Go back to 14 Brigade, yep.
Yeah, so with
14 Battalion, yep.
Yeah, 14 Regiment, I will say we have to be careful not to rob Peter to pay Paul until the trade is ratified, and it's got its own ECN for long-range strike. But until that is signed off LMPs and so forth, we can't recruit from an ab initio workforce directly from Kapuka, for example. So how we're getting around that is rather than strip gun regiments and others of trained asset, we took about 2/3 of what we needed to kick the year off. That was sufficient to now. Now we'll train some additional personnel from other units in the last quarter of this year. We anticipate extra gun courses being placed so that we can take a soldier with the correct pay group into that unit up until a point where we transition to ab initio recruitment, which we expect to be about Q2, Q3 next year.
It's all happening quick. Yeah.
Extremely quick.
Yeah.
I mean, we grew from nothing to something overnight, and the support of the Army writ large, and also the Joint Force, but focusing on Army for a minute, is second to none. So whilst we thought we would be working through sub-accounts, while we thought we would be requesting a whole lot of resources, at the end of the day, due to its DSR priority and the focus of Army specific to not only long-range strike, but also offensive and defensive fires more broadly, it's more of a push-pull mentality. So we're incredibly lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I suppose that's 14 Reg with long range fires. You just mentioned a move for 16 Reg from Woodside.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep,
I mean,
to Edinburgh. Yep.
So I've got 2 regiments that are in an introduction into service paradigm. 14 Regiment just commencing, 16 Regiment much further along. They have successfully undertaken a range of FOT activities this year already, including historic weapons engagements using Sidewinders and a further engagement on Talisman Sabre. They're about to move from their previous unit location at Woodside, where they've been entrenched for a very long time. So this has been quite a long game in ensuring that they're moving from their ancestral home into something that is much, much, much more capable.
Yeah.
And they're looking to do that move in Q4 this year in preparation for 2026.
So, and you talked before, you hinted about Edinburgh being the centre for fires, and you talked about the opportunities and the millions of dollars of purpose-built infrastructure that you're about to occupy. More broadly, though, if we talk about the region, why was Adelaide chosen, or Edinburgh chosen for long-range fires and then air defence as well?
It's no surprise we're in Adelaide. When you have a look at what RAF Base Edinburgh provides in relation to connectivity to the Joint Force, it'd be hard to beat. You've got a range of Air Force units, and I use that term broadly, resident in Edinburgh that have, if not a like function to what we do in the 10th Brigade, then there's certainly similarities that we can connect to and balance off. Operational targeting would be one. Target intelligence would be another, as well as air lift capacity, organic to the base itself. We also are in Adelaide for force deployment and force projection. So from Adelaide, we can easily project north, east, and west on both road, rail, and air. And of course, there's also a port facility as well. So for what it provides for us in order to force project to where our mission is likely to be undertaken, it's second to none.
And does it help being close to Port Wakefield, Woomera, all these training areas where your training areas, not only has the brigade grown significantly, all the regiments are going to grow, your training areas have to grow because the capabilities that you're firing from, you're going from training area to training area now. Does proximity to training areas play into that sort of component of choosing Edinburgh?
Yes, it does. It's no surprise that based on the range of our weapons, the weapons being the missile themselves, that we can't conventionally employ them or test them in many training areas. That said, we have to think about how we employ our training areas and non-defence training areas differently. Woomera will play an active part. It's a heavily used training area across all services, but in terms of what it provides for us, with some development potential, would suggest that as we start to employ longer range systems, the close proximity relative is certainly a benefit.
Absolutely awesome. So I suppose that's the brigade as it stands now. We've got, and into the future, 14 reg, 16 reg and 9 reg as well. And then you've got elements spread from Brisbane to, and a command node up in Brisbane. And then in Edinburgh, moving to purpose-built facilities. Can we go back to the history? Why was 10 Brigade chosen for the namesake and the like? And I suppose how do we go forward with 10 Brigade? Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting question because although we're known as 10 Fires Brigade, the 10th Brigade, the headquarters, the designator, isn't just another army formation. What's in it is predominantly determined by namesake through the Regimental History Committee and others advising to understand why it's the 14th Regiment or why it's 54 Battery based on historical lineage plus some others. The 10th was simply, like all our brigades in the Army, originally an infantry brigade of the First World War. It consisted of the 37th, 8th, 9th and 40th Battalions and fought, valiantly on the Western Front. It had other iterations, at least 3, as a militia brigade between the First World War and current day, for example, and now it stands back up in its status predominantly as a regular organisation infused with all circuits.
So, yeah, state of play, the history of 10 Brigade, now 10 Fires Brigade. But so what job were you given? What's the role of 10 Brigade when you took up command and you're like, okay, this is going to be a huge whirlwind of amazing capability and growth and the soldiers are so keen to get in here. What is your job as a brigade, sir?
Yeah, well, initially that was a good question because we're buying a whole bunch of new capability and we knew we had to do something with it. But in terms of defining exactly what our opposite is in coalition partners, for example, wasn't as easy as what it might seem. Are we a field artillery brigade? Are we a deep strike brigade? Are we a multi-domain task force? Quite frankly, the answer to that question simplistically put is we are a bit of each, and predominantly that reflects what each function does. Our role is to generate land's contribution to long-range multi-domain strike. It is there to also contribute to ground-based short-range air defence to the integrated air and missile defence plan. But it's also the specialist effects within our mission statement that are important, and that's actually the function of my headquarters. That reflects both divisional and operational level targeting. The latter, something that land has not traditionally done because we've never been able to either see or in fact shoot that far.
It's your constant touch points with RAF and talking about the Air Force and the air domain show that joint component that I don't think many brigades are really heavily into. It's like well integrated, and you've got, we'll talk to it in a minute, but TS with 16 Reg elements up at RAF Tyndall working in the Air Ops Centre and stuff as well. Before we get to that though, so we know that if we come down to the tactical level, like the mortars provide organic fire support to an infantry battalion, artillery, which is your background, sir. Your field guns, sir. Mm-hmm. Yep. You provide artillery, provides fires to a brigade. You provide fires and effects to who? Who are you there to service, sir?
Simply the Joint Integrated Force.
Yep.
We might support, or we do support, for example, direct support reinforcing fires to Australia's 1st Division in the sense that the weapon system within our long-range strike regiment, being 14, is not actually the platform, it's the missile. And so what determines which echelon we support, for example, is predominantly its range, its effect and its employability. So if I could use an analogy that, troops of HIMARS equipped with GIMLARs, a range that is within a division's operating area, have a different engagement authority.
we talked about, was that a weird shift for some of the people being employed in the brigade, being from going from, a lot of people get focused on a platform, not the ammunition. And we've had Colonel Ola Smith talk about the use of drones in Russia and Ukraine conflict, and changing from what was sort of like a capability focus to an expense item or an ammunition. So we get drones to an ammunition point, then we fire them. I think your shift from the capability itself, it just enables the rocket to be fired or the missile to be fired. Was that a weird shift, or it come quite naturally?
I think it come naturally to those sort of with a RAA or fires background, because we've always known that the munition has been the weapon, not necessarily the delivery platform. It still took some education, because generally speaking, our platforms have only ever had same or similar type of munition. So, for example, an M777, yes, it has different types of smoke, it has different types of illumination, has different types of HE, but it's still within the same tactical echelon. I think that the game changer here is that who we support is often determined by what goes in it. And that has been an evolution and an education for all of us, I think. And that's reflected in our concept of employment on how we would deploy and employ our platforms, because the engagement authority for those platforms may be different depending on the missile that we're using.
If we go to that concept of employment next, talking from the C2 component, obviously an artillery regiment has a JFEC, Joint Fires and Effects Coordination Centre, and they coordinate fires from a sensor to a shooter. How does that work in layman's terms, I suppose, at your level, in terms of supporting each of these different echelons or sort of levels of sort of effects and targets?
It's a really good question, because as a headquarters, less the raise, train, sustain of our direct command units that has been a steady focus for much of my team. In terms of my brigade headquarters staff, particularly my battle captains, my BM, my chief of staff, and outliers from just about every directorate in Army, the primary focus has actually been the establishment of the Land Effects Coordination Centre. So if I can draw that out for a minute, when I talk about fighting at echelon, we provide the divisional JFEC, or Joint Fires and Effects Coordination Centre. That is commanded by an 06 that is part of my headquarters, but outposted in Brisbane through a natural pairing with the 1st Australian Division, just like any JFEC at whatever level. And when the division stands up, the G35 Echo, any other effector will be supporting that function. Not necessarily under command, but supporting the function for command of 1st Australian Division. We have a similar but bespoke arrangement at the minute with the 2nd Australian Division also. CO9 Regiment provides that nucleus with his team, depending on what the mission set is, and we further reinforce that from the brigade. They are still at the tactical level, albeit fighting divisional fires. The new game changer for us was understanding what a JFEC for land would look like in the operational space. We are partnered with other coalition nations, but in particular the 3rd Multi-Domain Task Force out of Hawaii. So I talk about the split personality of the Field Artillery Brigade versus MDTF. My headquarters is much more like an MDTF than a FAB. The DCUs provide a function not unlike a FAB, but my headquarters is much more centred on being a multi-domain task force, or at least partnered with it. That Land Effects Coordination Centre stood up for the first time this year. We weren't expecting it to be frank, or we were going to try.
You've got so many stretch goals. I think like everything is a stretch goal, and you're trying to get after all these things, and it works, and you're like, amazing.
Yeah, I was. I'm particularly proud of the men and women that drove all parts of the brigade, but as it relates to the LEC, we went from a concept to a thing on PCC 5 Scenario B.
Project Convergence,
Convergence, partnered with MDTF. But we then stood it back up and had a magnificent head out on Pac Sentry. And then we created another ESD and did the same for Talisman Sabre, where all our targeting systems were live, and we synthetically pushed target data to subordinate JFECs, as well as firing platforms in Darwin from where we were stood up in Adelaide.
I think before we get to the Darwin component, because we're sort of toying with it, but we're definitely going to get there and firing for the first time in that construct. If we talk about, so you just mentioned a couple of things with partnering with different nations, learning stuff off the Americans and how they do things, and different coalition partners in TS. How quickly, and then you talked about where regulations will allow, how quickly are all these things, like the regulations and the SOPs and the TTPs, how quickly are these being rolled out for these batteries to be able to fire the different weapon systems?
Yep.
And sorry, not weapon systems, the ammunition itself. Yeah.
I mean, we're a sum of all parts, right? So it's not just a 10 brigade solution. And I need to point out now that the LEC itself, like a normal JFEC, 10 brigade only provides the nucleus to the LEC. If you walk into the LEC on any given day, we'll be front and centre. There'll be soldiers from every SIG regiment who are assisting us in the communication, because as I've quickly found out as a professional gunner, everything is in my brigade is now a log or comms problem.
Yeah, the signalers must just be like, oh, yeah.
They are having a ball.
Yeah.
You know, there's some frustrations around networking that we are working through, but we're on the cutting edge of making what we have work. And as a result, it's less about software and it's less about the technical solution. It is more about understanding connectivity or the blocks to it. Yeah. So we are a sum of all parts, TTPs, SOPs, doctrine. We can't pay lip service to that, because if we weren't capturing the knowledge through subsequent variations of our concept of employment and then more granular documents such as TTPs for the LEC, by the time we hit a single posting cycle, half of that knowledge will be lost. So it's became, if not the main effort, then it's quite frankly supporting effort one when it comes to the Land Effects Coordination Centre and subordinate COMREL or command relationships with our other JFECs. 10 Brigade headquarters was never designed as a raise, train, sustain headquarters. It was designed as an operational headquarters. So even if people have RTS jobs, they have an operational function also.
So I think we've talked about C2 and passing target data. We talked about the gun line in its infancy. We're going to get into some actual firing for TS in a component. Let's talk about the sensor. Obviously, mortar fire controllers observe fire for mortars, and JFTs or joint fires teams observe for artillery. I imagine, noting how many echelons you talked about you're supporting, how do the sensors work for you in getting target data into that LEC?
At the divisional level, the division has the first Australian division clearly has its own concept of employment. It is fighting a hard fight across nodal design where it can tap into a range of external sensors, but it does have organic capability itself, and I think we know that. I'll focus on the operational theatre because that's different. I'm keen to point out that we don't necessarily have a strategic FO that is, 1,000 k's forward in the battle space. That's not how that works. Operational targeting relies on a number of target tracks and feeds that can't be well described as a single entity. So we are well connected, for example, to the national intelligence community and understanding what capacity they have to observe, see, understand emissions, understand SIG profiles, for example, which is different than your traditional targeting sense. We also are, closely partnered with other coalition nations that have assets that can do that also. But we get our target feeds from many different sources. It's the art as well as the science becomes our ability to fuse them effectively. And that's something that we're working hard to understand. We have a range of targeting systems that we employ, some in service, a couple that we're trialling.
Yeah, insane to get all that target data and then try to make sense and fuse it like you just spoke about. If we talk, like the elephant in the room is your latest test. So you talked about Project Convergence Capstone 5, going over there and integrating. If we come to the latest sort of test, which was Talisman Sabre, we've seen a lot of open source media about the amazing things that have happened. Prism, GIMLARS, High Rain. What did you achieve on Talisman Sabre as a brigade, sir?
Oh, well,
where do we start?
If we're talking long range strike,
yeah.
We went from an army overnight that was grounded in the 0 to 20 kilometre battle to one that demonstrated a precision shot at over 300. I mean, that's as simply put as I can make it. They're game-changing differences in land's contribution, and to be able to demonstrate that was almost indescribable. At the time, you almost first, as the commander of it, you felt a little bit like a first-year lieutenant. You were 50% super excited to get it done, but you were 50% hugely relieved once it occurred.
Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah, as it takes off, and you're just like, thank God that happened, and now let's shift focus to the target. Yeah,
it's a bit like how I fight at echelons. I think 50% of me was waiting for the takeoff, and then we quickly transitioned to the other 50 that was waiting for the landing. But and I don't think I was alone in that.
Did you say what was your part on the ground when the prism was fired?
A call out to. Just about every stakeholder that helped us get there, our teammates at CASG, our teammates in Army headquarters, and indeed our teammates in other parts of Army, the Director of Practice function facilitated by the School of Artillery, the DPRAC function on the CJ LFX 2 weeks earlier, facilitated by Colonel Wheatley and a team of others, including one regiment. I mean, it was again, sum of all parts and a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
My individual role was assisting in the narration of the event, for example, in conjunction with HLC and DGS and I, Brigadier Brown. We facilitated sort of the synthetic thread around the shot itself to give context. But clearly, I think, notwithstanding the how many others helped us in this role. Shout out to 54 Siege Battery because that young bombardier and his two teammates in that cabin undertook an event that was unprecedented for us, and they did it with huge professionalism.
Yeah, before we get to, I'm not sure if you knew how they were chosen. The battery commander obviously gets to choose which det fires it. So before we get to the order for fire and then that anticipation of sort of building up to the leaving the tube. So just before we got on episode, which you spoke about, the crew sits inside the vehicle, which is, I suppose, it seems obvious, but like from a gunline perspective, you sit behind the gun and stuff. You wouldn't think they'd be in the cab of the vehicle, but that's obviously the way HIMARS is fired.
Yeah. HIMARS can't be remote fired, or at least in our configuration, so the crew is inside the vehicle. We shot our systems for the first time, or rather our platforms for the first time on the CJ LFX, which occurred about 10 days, 12 days previous to the Prism shot.
Yep.
We shot Rippers, which is the training munition. And we had 4 platforms and their crews involved in that practice side by side with our coalition partners, specifically Singapore and the United States as it pertained to HIMARS, but also Koreans with the K9 and the 239. But that was again a milestone event, engaging with our brand new systems. Transfer it to the Prism though, and that's a different game. And one that was a long time in its planning. Not so much the deployment of the weapons platform being the HIMARS, but everything from the reception and certification of the missile from the United States, the range planning. Since the dawn of time, our range planning has been defined by the magnificent efforts of sort of the land engineering agents and others who look to test criteria that determines, the risk profile of that round. It's a bit harder when you've got something such as a Prism, which hasn't been shot as much, to define what that actually looks like. So to get to yes on that and ensure that we had the correct approvals in place to shoot. So many personnel contributed to that. It was a boxed effort within Talisman Sabre more broadly and the HQJOC J7 more broadly. So I shouldn't underestimate, how much that took.
Yeah, so Mount Bundy training area, the gun lines set up, the detachment's inside the vehicle, and the command is given to fire. What's the anticipation of that first? Again, you said you've fired 10 days earlier, a different system or different rocket, sorry. What was the anticipation like on the ground as that sort of command to fire goes at downrange?
Yeah, I mean, the CJ LFX, firstly, was super exciting as well.
Yeah.
We had, it was a large event and it lasted for more than an hour with, 5 participating nations in the ground component and 11 overall. So being part of that was magnificent. I think the difference was that what the munitions that were engaged with across the spectrum of coalition forces on the CJ LFX were all in service. So we knew exactly what to expect. Even if we hadn't fired them before, certainly somebody else had. You go to engaging with the Prism, And although it has been shot before, yes, we've never done it, but the United States hasn't done a lot of it either. So in the Australian context, we're in a new game. So, yeah, there was a build-up and there were rehearsals conducted as you would expect there to be. I think it's fair that the detachment, who performed admirably, were probably a little nervous prior to its physical execution.
That waves of like so much excitement to be the det that fires, and then to be like, oh, it's us now as well. Like that nervousness would be, oh yeah, I could only imagine.
Oh, well, we had a lot of people watching.
Yeah.
So, and noting who those people were, failure was never an option. And in hindsight, looking back on it, the amount of effort that went into its planning, it would have only been a mechanical issue that would have caused us not to shoot. But there was a degree of, I guess, huge level of excitement interdisposed with, your normal professional ethic as you're undertaking the practice, with a fair degree of nervousness for some of us, I guess, when it went off, which is a natural reaction. But, yeah, releasing ordnance and then clearly filling that time in between, I think General Vag called him some fun facts that he was able to talk to specific to the munition whilst it was in flight.
For 4 minutes, yeah.
We didn't go quite that long, but you could have heard a penny drop for the last 60 seconds of silence, and then to see the impact of that precision strike munition was indescribable.
So amazing.
It was.
I suppose that's the NT and the middle of Australia. If we shift focus to Shoalwater Bay and come on to that side of the house, what did 10 Brigade do on the eastern coast?
Actually, before we do that, let's just finish the NT because the 14 Regiment weren't the only firing call sign up there.
Sorry, I talked about Tyndall before and having integrated. Yeah, so go.
So we had the majority of 16 Regiment deployed on Talisman Sabre. They were mostly centred on Tyndall. However, they would move in and out of that AO between the combat rehearsal that they were undertaking and some live fire activities that they actually were undertaking at Bradshaw as well. So they were quite mobile throughout. They provided some of their radars and weapons platforms in support of the 14th Regiment as well. But predominantly they were fighting with the Air Force at Tyndall for the majority of Talisman Sabre. They not only achieved a milestone of FOT&E with their physical engagement of a 120, they paired with a Patriot call sign for the ground-based component into the integrated air and missile defence picture, and they were fully part of the team at Tyndall. 9th Regiment was deployed as well. They were deployed in Tyndall. They were providing a JFEC in Sydney, and they also provided JXT with a radar to us at Shoalwater Bay to assist in tracking the shot. So all parts of the brigade were represented in most parts of the AO.
How is the shift for 16 Reg moving up to Tyndall now? So they've gone from RBS 70 to NASAMS, and we've got canister and high mobility. So the different systems, but like I'm going to make the assumption that like more mobile in nature, they're moving around and stuff. Was that interesting to watch the regiment shake out and sort of operate in a completely different context because of the capability that they now have?
Yeah, it was. So I'm not from an air defence background, but I was quite aware on how we conduct planning for the employment of a legacy system such as RBS 70. Seeing them physically deployed at the troop level in Tyndall was profound. So I've seen it on paper many times. I've looked at their ConEmp, quite often, but to physically see their deployment and connectivity between the FDCs, the canister launchers, their HMLs, where they're employed, how they reinforce those troops through the integration of Air Force assets as well for physical protection, for example. Pictures paint thousands of words, and I think we've produced a capability handbook for the brigade to send out to every other part of Army and the Joint Force that sort of gets to this about the size and magnitude of the deployment. It's not about necessarily the amount of people, it's about the amount of platforms and vehicles and distances due to radhads and others. It's a considerable footprint. And when you're fighting for space on an Air Force base, for example, it's not contentious, but it needs to be well planned. And when we're talking about the defence of Australia and noting that 16th Regiment provides our defensive fires from land to the Joint Integrated Force, particularly Air Force, we need to invest a lot of effort into getting better at that. the fact is that 16 and more broadly, the ground-based air defence planning capability the Army has been partnered and in fact embedded with the Air Force in the AOC and JFAC for a considerable time now. They're probably a step ahead of us from ahead of the other part of the brigade, which is emerging, being the long-range strike component. So the knowledge is most certainly there. It's just ensuring that it continues to develop and fuse.
Another thing is that RBS 70, a smaller platform, like I would assume some people are assuming, like outsiders looking in, that they're going to get allocated this air defence asset. NASAMS, obviously a larger platform, but also you talked about where you support in terms of, at which levels. Is there a tendency for most people to assume they're going to get air defence from NASAMS, despite the fact that it's a large, you just talked about the large footprint. It's not going to be organic to all these people and it can't be spread incredibly thin. That's not, it doesn't replace man pads, I suppose.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. No, it does not. So we've gone from an air defence capability for land that went from 0 to 5Ks, from effectively 5 to 30. That's game changing in itself, right? But when you look at the C2 architecture, air forces generally always controlled the operational fires of Army's ground-based air defence capability naturally because it's in the air domain, right? So most of the time, I think Army, even historically, has been used to accepting elements from 16th Regiment and helping to secure them, feed them, provide logistics nodes to them without thinking that they would somehow employ their operational fires. That's not to suggest, though, that their operational fires can't be incorporated into an op plan. The employment of our long-range strike, a little bit different in the fact that land still owns that and will continue to do so, noting that we can employ it across several domains.
So I suppose that's the centre of Australia and Mount Bundy training area into Bradshaw and a number of different, and Tyndall as well, 3.5 hours south of Darwin, RAF-based Tyndall. If we shift focus to the eastern side, can we talk about what was achieved on the East Coast?
Yeah, we can. So I'll talk live fire first because that was a little bit more synthetic in the sense that the first time we're going to shoot HIMARS, supported by all other aspects of the brigade, including 16, including 9 Reg. We deployed 4 platforms for the purpose of that CJ LFX. I was Director General CJ LFX on behalf of the JOC J7. That was executed by, as a Director of Practice, being Colonel Wheatley, who's my 06 JFEC commander. And I thank Commander Wundiv for that because he obviously had to lose him for a period of time
from the JFEC
while we focused on it. We had 2 Deputy Directors of Practice specific to sector, CO1 Regiment on loan as the DDPRAC for Piri Piri sector. We also had a subunit commander from 4 Reg down to do the same on Townsend Island. So the complexity when you start to add OIC's practice, noting all the weapon systems involved, Japanese air defence systems, Korean land-based systems, Singaporeans, Australians, United States, both Army and Marine Corps, was... I was going to say challenging, but actually it was just well planned. So the execution went quite smoothly and we saw our systems integrated with those from other partner nations. We had a number of rehearsals leading up to it. Land management and range management was exceedingly good. And, I've done Director of Practice multiple times, but I take my hat off to both Colonel Wheatley and CO1 and team because their execution was outstanding.
I think that's that constant tension. You talked about traces changing and being able to sort of, traces being more complex and then subsequently balancing a JFEC or effects coordination centre in general and then also DPRAC and sort of the safety considerations. That's a constant tension that you're sort of pulling staff from some places and putting them in others. It was huge
constant
mammoth
movement.
effort. Yeah.
So it turned out to be just about everything we did on Talisman Sabre. I'll use the term boxed. Because we had to plan it all at the same time. And when I say planning, that planning, like any Talisman Sabre, was, months, if not just over a year in being. But we then had to sort of pause one part while we looked to another. So if I can use the divisional JFEC as an example, extremely important because we needed to execute the function on behalf of Commander 1st Australian Division 4 for the FTX serial, which commenced the day after the CJ LFX. But as you know, just because it commences on that day doesn't mean you're not busy for the 2 weeks leading up to it. So we went from divisional orders in Townsville on a Sunday directly back, for example, to Shoalwater Bay in preparation for the CJ LFX. As soon as we completed that, the DPRAC function ceased. Commander JFEC stood back up and moved straight back into the AO, and it was functioning under an SO1 in his absence, but we all had to be fluid in our appointments, and there were some brigade personnel that I would assess had more than 2, trending 3 primary appointments across the spectrum of Talisman Sabre, and the transition was fluid between them.
So that's the safety architecture behind it, and then the interplay between that and the JFEC. If we go to what actually happened at Shoalwater Bay for the CJ LFX, yep.
Well, so what you saw there was a literal demonstration of interoperability between ourselves, regional and coalition partners. It demonstrated a real-time fight tonight capability. And although the CJ LFX, for example, was conducted with some artificialities around the range planning and so forth, the reality was it was still a tactical threat. And to demonstrate that in conjunction with our friends and partners, I think was an extremely strong message.
So I suppose that's the LFX component. You just talked about that. If we go to the field training exercise, let's talk about what happened on the East Coast for that FTX.
Yeah, certainly. So my organic elements from Long Range Strike didn't participate in the FTX part of the capability. That wasn't really a reason. More specifically, we were focused on an FTX to generate the divisional operational fires and targeting component, and that was done in concert with Headquarters 1st Australian Division. My JFEC commander provided the nucleus, as I spoke about before, but it was a sum of all parts from other elements, both internal and external, to the division. So they had a robust fight spread across both the Alpha and Bravo node with a step up in order to demonstrate that capability, which I was very, very proud of.
So you talked about div JFEC a couple of times, one div specifically, but if we shift tack to 2 div, what sort of contribution are we talking about if we shift to the 2 div and their CONEM?
Yeah, so at the moment that's centred on a CO9 regiment providing a similar effect to Commander 2 div in his operational role. That we will grow that capability. I don't think we're there yet, quite frankly. We can't do everything at once. That'll be a focus for us because most of our real-time contingency planning and contribution to theatre plans reflects the 2nd Division or its mission statement as much as what it does the 1st. So that'll be a growth path for us next year. On Talisman Sabre specifically, we provided that function through Lieutenant Colonel Bryn and his team. With a couple of augments, but we also saw 16 Regiment employed in the Defence of Australia role from its point defence capability, albeit with the Air Force.
So that's 1 div, 2 div, and you've hinted at a few. I think you've got a lot of you've sort of achieved a lot, an amazing, probably more than you thought you would, sir, for the whole brigade. It's been absolutely awesome. But then subsequently, if we look forward into what 10 Brigade, what's the next challenge? You've hinted at a few throughout the episode, but what's next for 10 Brigade?
The introduction into service schedules, which are relatively fixed, will continue for all DCUs. The continual growth or forecast growth within those DCUs likewise will continue. So next year we anticipate to go from 8 equipments that we've got now in our HIMARS fleet to considerably more. Let's say well beyond 20 in 2026. That follows that it'll have a regimental headquarters apportioned to it next year, and that regimental headquarters will have a commanding officer, an adjutant, an RSM, and all parts of the puzzle. So we see the growth of 14 in its very right versus an independent battery. 16 Regiment will continue to be afforded asset priority from the School of Artillery into that trade to ensure that it's sustainable as we race towards FOC for the NASAMS capability. We have radars as a brigade subunit, which will be coming online also. So exceedingly exciting out 36 months. As much as I think the landscape has changed almost to an indescribable fashion under my tenure. If I was to come back in 3 years and look at the brigade, it'd be, uniquely different again, based on its speed of growth. The headquarters has a slightly different focus. So whilst we steward that, we're well served by all parts of the puzzle, such as CASG, Army Headquarters and others assisting us in that journey. The headquarters, though, will be focused on developing its operational fires and targeting methodology, and we need to grow that capability. So we are well nested inside the defence targeting community in order to continue that journey. We've well and truly commenced it, but growing the asset, as with everything, you can have the smartest platforms, you can have the smartest bombs, but it won't work unless you've got the smartest people. So growing the credible workforce is most certainly a focus for us.
We did an episode with Aviation Command on the inception of Apache and one aircraft coming to Townsville and changing and stuff. You've got NASAMS, HIMARS, a number of different platforms rolling out really quickly, despite people probably saying that it wouldn't happen that quick, and it definitely did. Do you know what I mean? You must feel like the pace.
Definitely know.
Yeah. So is soldiers? Is it an exciting place to work? I mean, it is an exciting place to work in 10 Brigade and get after this brand new kit and start firing these amazing platforms.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you've seen plenty of defence media interviews or newspaper articles that interview our bombardiers or our soldiers about what they feel. I won't put words in their mouth. I don't need to. I don't think. I mean, they have a unique job, and whilst uniqueness is a feature of Army right across the land force about what we can do, because I don't think there's any boring parts of it, by the way.
No,
Outside 10 Brigade, everyone is doing something different at the minute. Everyone is in a period of exciting transition and understanding exactly where they fit. So Army writ large, I think, is potentially the most exciting place it has been for a long time, if not ever.
Yeah.
But, selfishly, in 10 Brigade, it couldn't be more exciting. I think they're learning skills and employing them on something that's uniquely new. This isn't just a find replace. NASAMS wasn't a find replace from an RBS 70.
No, we talked about that before.
HIMARS is not a new field gun.
No.
So, and the employability of it through a connected network, through a targeting domain, is something that is developing at pace to the point where it's just a full-time job understanding, changes within it. And that comes with challenge, but it also comes with incredible opportunity. So whether you're a gunline soldier who's learning how to drive a HIMARS vehicle, or an air defence operator that's transitioned from RBS 70 into NASAMS, right up to detachment commanders that are shooting Prism for the first time at the rank of bombardier, a lieutenant who's trying to get his head around transition from an M777 into a HIMARS troop, the battery commander or the brigade commander, I don't think there's a single echelon within the brigade that isn't proud of the opportunity that we've been afforded and thankful for it.
Oh, that's absolutely awesome. That's, I suppose, Joint Fires. Thank you so much for your time, Brigadier Nick Wilson. It's been absolutely awesome, sir.
No worries. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Oh, and if you want to come to 10 Brigade, hey, just send me an email.
No worries. We'll do so. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.